Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It is the 7th of March, 2024, about 1 o'clock here at Texas time. And I wanted to talk to you about a case that I came across the other day. It's got a medium amount of publicity, but it probably needs to be publicized even more. There is a gentleman, and his name is Ramon Escobar. And Mr. Escobar um, is originally from El Salvador. And at age 16 years old, Mr. Escobar immigrated from El Salvador to the United States. And he had at one point had been an asylum seeker from El Salvador, and lived in extreme poverty. And this was during what was known as the Football War, which was a civil war there in El Salvador. So from living on the streets, extreme poverty during the middle of a war zone, I don't know what the guy went through. I don't know what he went through. What I do know is that a little research that I had done, at one point or the other, he was deported from the United States multiple times. But after even multiple deportations and even serving in federal prison for reentry after deportation, he was granted asylum. And some people may, start yelling and screaming about our lax immigration laws, yada, yada, yada. I'm an actual immigration practitioner. As I told everybody, I'm retired from CBP, U.S. Customs. One time or the other, I was in charge of immigration for the fourth largest border port in the United States. So I do immigration law and, by coincidence, deportation defense. And getting asylum, especially defensive asylum, especially after you've been deported a few times, is not as easy as some would think. So I imagine that there was probably some pretty extensive history of the issues that Mr. Escobar had gone through. In any event, much like our Angel Resendez, the railroad killer, he had been actually deported many, many times. There were several arrests between 1992 to 2018. One of them was actually a felony burglary of a vehicle going all the way back to 1992. And that felony actually ended up becoming a 5-year trip to TDCJ because he failed, Texas Department of Criminal Justice, because he failed out of his probation. After apparently he had gotten out, later, failure to stop and give information. In Texas, basically, that's a hit and run without any kind of injuries. There was an assault bodily injury, another assault bodily injury about 6 years later, and then a trespass to property in around 2018. Well, as he was going through this process, he also was deported, it appears, in 2001, deported again in 2007, charged again with reentry after deportation in 2001, 2007, 2012. Somewhere along the line, and this is going to be, in and around 2012, 2013, the federal government, as he was in the process of getting prosecuted for reentry after deportation, he ends up showing some signs of mental instability. And because of that, they actually interned him with psychiatric treatment in a hospital in Springfield, Missouri. It was during that time that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. However, and this is kind of the interesting part, you guys know that I teach psychology courses, and I sometimes find it difficult to believe that people with severe mental issues, such as schizophrenia, are quote unquote, rehabilitated or cured. Generally not how this works. But regardless, for the criminal justice side, the forensic psychology side, he was rehabilitated, which allowed him to stand trial. He actually took the reentry after deportation to trial, which I also find interesting as a federal criminal defense attorney, because that's a hard case to win. Be that as it may, he lost and got sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. Well, after the diagnosis and so on and so forth, in and around August 2018, you take a look at these misdemeanor crimes: burglary, but you have assault. The assault cases are all misdemeanors. A misdemeanor basically is something that's punishable of a year or less. So like in Texas, you have Class B, that's 180 days. Class A, up to 360 days, but it's not actually going to prison, right? Those are reserved for felony. So he did have the one felony, burglary of a motor vehicle, but nothing really major. All of a sudden, in August of 2018, literally something flips and the switch is flipped. on Ramon Escobar. I know they don't describe how, they don't describe what, they don't say exactly what happened. But basically, what ended up happening was he beat his uncle, who had taken him in off the streets from El Salvador, there in Houston, Texas, beat him to death with a police baton. 2 days later, his aunt is asking questions about where's his uncle. He ends up strangling her to death, steals her car, drives to California. About a week later, he attacked the guy in Santa Monica underneath the pier who was homeless with a baseball bat. The guy ended up surviving. September 9th, attacks and robs two more people there in Southern California near the beach area. September 10th, the very next day, he attacked two people, Antonio Ramirez, and beat him with a baseball bat, and Mr. Ramirez passed away. He attacks the gentleman, Albert Gene Scott, and then he attacks Michelle Matisse there on the outskirts of MacArthur Park. He then killed Brandon Ridout and Kelvin Williams with a baseball bat in downtown Los Angeles. There was a third victim who also survived. And then he actually killed Stephen Cruz, also under the Santa Monica Pier with a baseball bat. And then he killed another older gentleman, Jorge Martinez of Santa Monica. So in a 30-day stretch, he had 13 attempted murders or murders in less than 30 days, stretching from Houston, Texas, all the way out to California. We don't know what was going on. We do know that he ended up claiming, after he had pled guilty to avoid the death penalty in 2019, he was adjudicated to be sane, stand trial, avoided the death penalty, and he claims, okay, that it was out of personal animosity and financial hardship, which, if it's personal animosity and you have a resentment of people that have money and wealth that you do not have, attacking homeless people under a pier, living under a pier, doesn't really make a lot of sense. Be that as it may, Mr. Escobar then proceeds that he got moved out to North Kent State to serve out Kern County there in California, to serve out his prison sentence. In February of 2023, this past year about this time, he then strangled and killed his cellmate, Juan Villanueva, who was serving a life sentence for a sexual assault of a minor. And so apparently he is now going to face the death penalty. We don't know exactly what's going to end up happening, but we do know that, he is. This one is really hard to explain. That amount of level violence from literally nothing throughout the course of your lifetime to also that amount of violence is something that is not easily explained. I just think it's interesting that there has been some publicity on it, but just not that level of publicity. There's publicity on, people that are drunk drivers and stuff like that, but somebody that's intentionally going around and beating somebody to death with a baseball bat, you think that would get more publicity, but we don't know. In any event, wanted to introduce you to Mr. Ramon Escobar.